Alrighty, welcome everybody to Econ Chats, videos designed to hopefully allow you to be a little bit more successful, not only in economics class and on the milestone, but hopefully, possibly, maybe even in life. And welcome to video number 5, numero cinco. That is, we are going to be discussing a little topic that is probably one of the more important aspects of economics, and that's supply and demand. Now, before you ever took an economics class, you may have even heard of this concept, supply and demand. But hopefully, after all is said and done, you'll understand just really how important it really is, especially for you to understand it. And so, supply and demand is the reason why anything costs what it costs. So, if we're talking about why does Tom Brady make millions of dollars a year, supply and demand. If we're talking about, why does a McDonald's cheeseburger cost $1? Well, supply and demand. Why does anything cost what it costs? The answer is always going to be supply and demand. And so the best way to kind of get you going on supply and demand and let you know how it works, we're going to break it down a little piece by piece. We're going to explain a little bit about demand, then we're going to explain a little bit about supply, and then in a later video, we'll mush them together and see what you think. So as always, of course, this is based on the standard, so let's go ahead and show you that one. All right, so this is the second microeconomic standard, and it says SSEMI 2. It reads, explain how the law of demand, the law of supply, and prices work to determine production and distribution in a market economy. So right off the bat, you should be able to understand that the law of supply and the law of demand are pretty important. They even tell you right there what it is that they do. They determine what is produced. They determine how it's going to be sent out. They determine what the prices are ultimately going to be. The law of supply and the law of demand is the end all in terms of what's being produced within a market economy and what is the cost in a market economy. The substandards read A, of course, you have to define the law of supply and the law of demand. Well, that makes sense. And then B, you got to get into distinguishing between supply and quantity supplied, and then demand and quantity demanded. So yeah, these are kind of similar sounding words, of course. But what you've got to understand is that there is a very distinct difference. And make sure you keep that in mind as I go through as quickly as I can, explaining what quantity demand is, what the law of demand is, what the law of supply is, what supply is, and what quantity supply is. So sit back, let's see what you think. Let's start with this textbook definition of demand. All right, we'll start with demand, then we'll get to its friend supply a little later on. Demand, though, reads the desire and ability to own a good or service at a particular price. So, demand, the desire and ability to own a good or service at a particular price. That's a really big, important concept. The desire and ability to own. I mean, after all, demand in and of itself, we sometimes think just means, I demand you do this. I demand that I get this. But in reality, when we talk about it from an economics term, demand is very specific. The customer has to have a desire to own it, but they also have to have an ability to pay. You see, I desire a 50,000 square foot mansion on my own private island somewhere in the South Pacific. I would like to have that house filled with expensive art and gold-plated everything and, just really tacky it up. But I would also like to have, an Olympic-sized swimming pool filled with mashed potatoes and supermodels. But here's the thing. I'm a teacher. I can't afford that. And so because of that, it's not going to be counted within demand when it comes to the economic term. Okay, demand is you have the desire and the ability to own a good or a service at a particular price. Now, speaking of prices, let's move on over to this other guy, quantity demanded. Now, every year, in just about every place, economic students all over the place tend to get quantity demanded and demand confused. Demand deals with a desire and ability to own, but check out the definition of quantity demanded. The quantity, or of course the number of a product that consumers are willing to buy at a particular price. So demand is the desire and ability to own something. Quantity demanded just means how many of them do you want? Now, with that comes this next thing, the law of demand. And the law of demand is pretty straightforward. It says that as prices increase or go up, quantity demanded is going to go down. Now remember, how many, when we're talking about quantity demand, how many do people want of a particular product at a particular price? Well, if that price goes up, people are going to want less. And that's what the law of demand is stating here. As prices increase, quantity demand is going to go down. People are going to want less as it becomes more expensive. That seems to make some sense, right? Well, think about it the other way. As prices go down, quantity demanded is going to go up. If something becomes cheaper, we're going to be willing to buy more of something. And that's what the law of demand says. Now, the one thing that you need to understand about the law of demand is that this is what we call an inverse relationship. And an inverse, of course, means opposite. So what that means is that it's two things are happening. The price does one thing, quantity demanded is going to do the opposite. It's going to do something different when we're talking about demand. All right. All right, so let's talk about something that something else economists like to do, and that's make graphs and charts. So they have something that they call a demand schedule, and it looks like this. It's a simple chart, and you'll notice that what you have is two columns or rows. I'm never really exactly sure which are which, but in either case, you have one side that says price, and then you have the other side that says quantity demanded. Now, notice there is no product associated with this. It doesn't tell us what's being sold or what the price is or what people want or anything. It doesn't matter. What does matter is that the law of demand is accurately portrayed here. What I mean by that is you'll notice that as prices increase, quantity demanded goes down. And then inversely, as prices go down, quantity demanded goes up. That means that this is a valid demand schedule, and this will work for what we want to do next, which is take this information and put it into a demand curve. Now, I know what you're thinking. I know what I hope you're thinking, at least. And that, of course, is that thing looks vaguely familiar. That's right. It looks a lot like a production possibilities curve, right? Yeah, you remember production possibilities curves, those things that tell us what we can possibly produce given our resources. We had these things, maybe we would have guns and butter on one end, or we'd have, shoes and watermelons, or we'd have hot and dogs, whatever the case. Well, what we have now, though, is this is slightly different because instead of two products, you'll notice that we have price on one axis and we have quantity demanded on the other. And again, you should be able to follow along. Pause it right now if you need to take a look at it for a little bit longer. But you should notice that as prices increase, quantity demanded also decreases. As as prices decrease, quantity demand goes back up. So that is demand. That's the demand, that's quantity demanded, that's the law of demand. You've even gotten to see a little schedule and curve, which you're not supposed to see until later on, but I hooked you up. Well, now what we got to do is we got to talk about supply. So let's go ahead and do that. Supply has a definition as well. And you should notice it seems very similar to demand, except it's the willingness of a business to produce a good or a service at a particular price. So whereas with demand, we were talking about consumers and what they wanted and their desire and ability to pay, now we're talking about really pretty much the willingness of a producer, of a business, of a firm, if you will. How willing are they? How many products will they produce given a certain price? So, very similar to what we saw with demand, we have quantity supplied, which just again means the quantity or number of a product that producers are willing to sell at a particular price. So, this is again just the complete opposite of demand. Whereas before we were talking about customers, now we're again talking about consumers. And since you were playing along so far, you should be able to tell me what the law of supply is without even looking at it. All right, I'll go ahead and show it to you. All right, as you'll notice, the law of supply is pretty much the same as the law of demand, except for a couple of differences. Number one, this thing is dealing with quantity supplied now, as opposed to quantity demanded. Also, you'll notice that the arrows behave in a direct relationship this time, which means that as price does one thing, quantity supplied is going to do the same thing. So as prices increase, quantity supplied also increases. As prices decrease, quantity supplied decreases. They're doing the same thing for supply. Now, the law of supply, though, is probably also going to make some sense to you. If things become more expensive, you're going to have more producers. You're going to have people willing to make more money. So they're going to make more of a good. However, if the prices bottom out on something, it becomes real cheap and people aren't making any money off of it, shocker, businesses aren't going to be in a real big hurry to produce a whole bunch of them. So as prices go down, they're going to produce less and less. Now, here we go. There's a supply schedule for you. Yeah. Looks exactly like a demand schedule, right? Yeah. Except there's a couple of differences. Well, really only one difference. That is now that instead of portraying the law of demand, it is telling us the law of supply. As prices increase from $1 to $2 to $3 or $4 or $5, you should see that quantity supplied is increasing. And if those prices dropped, you would see that a business would, again, not be willing to produce as much. And what we do is we plot it and we make something that looks like this, a supply curve. Ooh. So that's what your supply curve is going to look like. And you're going to notice that it's a completely different angle than we've ever had before. It's doing more of this upwards right thing, and that is going to be supply. Okay, that is what your supply curve is going to look like. So whenever you see something like this, you should automatically be able to recognize it as supply. And you should be able to know that because as prices increase, quantity supplied increases, as prices go down, quantity supply goes down, yada, yada, yada. All right, so now we've chatted about supply, we've chatted about demand, we've chatted a little bit about supply and demand, but we have yet to get these two bad boys together, and we'll be doing that on Econ Chats number 6, and that's where you're going to see supply and demand's where the magic happens, baby. That's where things get crazy, but until then, I hope, as always, that this made sense. I hope it helped you. You know, if you have any questions, to let me or your teacher know, but until then, thank you so much. Take care of yourselves. Bye. Get back. I'm all right, yeah.